All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we're jumping straight into a historical and theological study that is, frankly, absolutely jaw-dropping. We're unpacking a document that uncovers a 2,000-year-old paradigm shift. It's called the Ascension Gifts and the Cessationist Crisis. Now, I know what you might be thinking, but this isn't just dry history. It's this fascinating look at how a massive, foundational movement was supposedly buried, and the sheer awe of the evidence suggesting it actually survived the whole time.
So let's dive right into this massive historical question. It's one that a lot of people just assume is totally settled. For centuries, the dominant narrative, especially in Western theology, has been that the age of miracles, of prophets, and of apostles ended abruptly with the closing of the New Testament. You've probably heard this idea referred to as cessationism. But when you actually take a magnifying glass to the historical timeline and the primary texts, a massive, awe-inspiring mystery starts to unfold right before your eyes.
The source material we're looking at today presents a bold premise that completely flips the script. It argues that the original spiritual gifts didn't just fade away or get neatly tied up with a bow at the end of the first century. No, instead they were basically driven underground with institutional crises and political shifts. The study suggests there's this vibrant, continuous thread of miraculous and apostolic activity that's been weaving its way through history entirely under the radar. It's a real game changer for how we view the survival of early church practices.
To wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this, we really have to look first at the concrete ascension gifts Christ gave to the church, right from Ephesians chapter 4. The text defines these not as, abstract, ethereal abilities floating around, but as specific gifted persons. We're talking about apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. The author notes that the Greek word used here, doma, means a definite, concrete gift. They're described literally as Christ's ongoing presence and voice, given directly to the community.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how the source completely redefines apostles and prophets using actual New Testament evidence. If you look closely at the names recorded, it extends way beyond just the original 12 disciples. We often think the title of apostle was locked to just Peter, James, John, and that core group, right? But the study points out that people like Barnabas, Silas, Timothy, and Junia are all explicitly called apostles in the text. And prophets? People like Agabus, who accurately predicted a famine, or Philip's 4 daughters, they were actively operating long after the day of Pentecost.
Okay, so here's where we hit the absolute turning point of the study, and it all hangs on a single crucial word. That word is until. Paul writes that these specific gifts were given to equip the saints for ministry until we all attain to the unity of the faith and mature manhood. Think about that for a second. This single word completely dismantles the idea of an early expiration date for these roles.
Because the crucial point the author makes is that this termination clause is eschatological. Basically, that means these gifts are explicitly designed to stick around until the ultimate fulfillment of Christ's return. When you look at the landscape of history, we really have to ask ourselves, has the church reached ultimate perfect unity and complete maturity? Well, clearly not. Therefore, according to the very text used to establish these gifts in the first place, they must still be active and necessary today.
And this isn't just some abstract theory. The unbroken historical evidence actually backs it up. We can trace a continuous, documented string of early church leaders who directly witnessed these gifts in action, well into the 2nd and 3rd centuries. For example, the Didache, which is a super early Christian document, literally contains rules for how to handle traveling apostles. Justin Martyr explicitly stated the prophetic gifts remained. Irenaeus documented people healing the sick and raising the dead. Tertullian recorded regular visions in his congregation. The historical record is just positively alive with these accounts.
Now brace yourself for a massive historical plot twist. Augustine of Hippo. He's a foundational heavyweight church father. Now, early in his life, he suggested that miracles might have ceased. And as you might expect, cessationists often use those early writings to support their view. But later in life, he completely reversed his stance. He actually went on to catalog over 70 miracles that he personally witnessed or investigated in his own region. We're talking healings of the blind and paralyzed. He even wrote that if he tried to record all the miracles he knew of, the volume would simply be too long. Crazy, right?
So if the gifts never stopped, the study naturally asks the elephant in the room, why did they disappear from the mainstream? The staggering revelation here is that cessationism isn't actually a biblical doctrine at all. The word isn't even in Scripture. Instead, it was a reactionary theological construct. It was born out of institutional panic. You see, as the church grew and developed strict hierarchies, having a living, unpredictable prophet suddenly became, a major political complication for the established bishops.
Let's fast forward a bit to 313 AD and see how this all builds up. This is the year of the Constantinian shift, when Emperor Constantine essentially fused Christianity with Roman state power. The church underwent this radical transformation. The fiery, spontaneous house church movement that was forged in persecution, it cooled way down into a rigid, state-sponsored religion of the basilica. Clergy basically became civil functionaries. The study cites the specific moment as the single greatest practical cause of gift cessation, not because the theology changed, but because the spontaneity of the Spirit was, essentially, domesticated by the empire.
This entire historical history is perfectly captured in these two parallel streams spanning 2,000 years. On one side, you have the continuous, often underground witness of the Spirit, from the Desert Fathers to the Waldensians to the Moravians under Zinzendorf. They all maintained a vibrant prophetic culture. On the other side, you have this recurring suppression by institutional authorities. Anti-Montanist councils restricting speech, state-church fusions replacing dynamic encounters with static rituals, and later on, strict theological frameworks actively pushing against charismatic expressions.
At this point, the source study systematically dismantles some of the most common arguments used to say the gifts ended. Let's look at the claim based on Ephesians 2:20, which says the church is built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets. The argument usually goes, hey, once a foundation is laid, you don't need foundation layers anymore. Makes sense, right? But the source answers this brilliantly. Yes, the foundation is laid, but the builders still have to walk on that foundation while constructing the upper floors. The work continues until the building is completely finished.
Next up, the study takes on 1 Corinthians 13:10, which says, when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. For centuries, cessationists have claimed the perfect refers to the completed Bible. But the study points out that literally the very next verse says, then we shall see face to face. The context isn't about a book being finished. The context is entirely eschatological. It's about standing face to face with God at the resurrection. Absolutely no early church father interpreted this verse as referring to the closing of the biblical canon. None of them.
And then there's the argument from Jude 3 about the faith once for all delivered to the saints. The author notes that cessationists systematically conflate two entirely different categories here. Yes, the canonical revelation, the doctrinal gospel, is absolutely closed and finalized. No one is arguing that. But that does not mean the ongoing spiritual gift of prophecy is closed. In fact, in 1 Corinthians 14:1, the Apostle Paul explicitly commands believers to earnestly desire the spiritual gifts, especially that you may prophesy. You can absolutely have a closed canon and still obey a biblical command to pursue spiritual gifts.
To truly understand the immense, awe-inspiring global scale of this today, we have to look outside our immediate bubbles. The study highlights a fascinating reality. Cessationism is largely a Western European theological construct. Meanwhile, the vast majority of the modern global church, particularly in the global south, across Africa, Latin America, and Asia, fully embraces these ongoing gifts. Take the church in Ethiopia, for instance. They have a deep, unbroken history of prophetic and apostolic Christianity that never even accepted the Western cessationist drift. It just changes everything about how we understand the modern practice of faith worldwide.
After laying out this absolute mountain of historical and biblical evidence, the author concludes their verdict with this deeply provocative thought. They write, the same Spirit who moved on the waters at creation, who filled the apostles at Pentecost, who raised Yeshua from the dead, he has not retired. He does not retire. The gifts are alive because the giver is alive. I mean, wow. It is such a powerful reminder that history is not just about what happened back then, but what is actively continuing right now.
As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to step back and look at the sheer weight of what we've just uncovered together. 2,000 years of history, textual evidence, and global testimony all point toward an unbroken chain of spiritual vitality, which leaves us with a final paradigm-shifting question to ponder. If the evidence points to the fact that these gifts never truly stopped, and if the giver is indeed still alive and active today, are we actually ready to receive those gifts? Thank you so much for exploring this remarkable history with me. Keep asking questions and definitely keep digging into the source material.